I'm here because you have so many capable people in this church that had the same experience. So those of you who went, please feel free to interject at any time you want to. First of all, I want to say a word of thanks to Pastor Jackson, Derrick Jackson at First Baptist Winchester Street. He was totally responsible for this trip. And I had the distinct pleasure and honor of going on the same trip 6 years ago. So I'm one of the few people who's made this pilgrimage twice. And it was distinctly different each time. So I'll mention a little bit about that as we go through it. And I will just sort of raise my finger when I need to change the slide. I also want to thank another person at the heart of both of these trips is Dr. David Fleer from Lipscomb University, whose specialty is racial reconciliation. And he was the major professor for Derrick Jackson's dissertation 6 years ago, and that was the reason for the trip the first time. We were test subjects the first time. We did a pre-test and a post-test, and he looked at the differences in how the experience affected us. There were a lot of similarities between the two trips. We had a lot of the same churches represented. The audience were all church members at local churches. And so, we had members from your church, from First Presbyterian, from First Baptist Winchester, from Key Stewart, from, who else did I leave out? First United Methodist of Hendersonville, and Church of God of Prophecy in Gallatin. I can't remember some of the others that were along. The composition of both trips, the attempt was 50% African American, 50% white. And at the end, we were paired with a person that we'd been asked to share experiences with going forward. So I don't know how many people have done that, but I am sharing a community garden with the person that I walked across the Edmond Pettis Bridge with. And so we have a lot of meetings between each other to find common ground. The second trip was a result of the monthly racial reconciliation. We don't have a name for the group, but we meet at First Baptist on racial reconciliation once a month, led by Derrick Jackson from white churches, African American churches around the city. And there was a request months ago, let's do another trip. Let's take another trip. And it didn't take long. And the fact that they pull that together on busy schedules, and I'll give Derrick Jackson and David Fleer, who went along sort of as the tour guide and the knowledge person of everything we did. He had all the scoop about where we were and what we were doing. Our bus departed at 6:30 a.m. on May the 6th, and you'll find all the content and everything we did in day one is unbelievable. And we got a late start because God is good, and what happened was that our bus driver coming from somewhere was diagnosed with COVID. And they didn't have anybody else to send. That company didn't have anybody else to send. So they shopped around and they found a company in Mississippi that could send to somebody. And so he was there on time, but we left a little late. And so we were behind schedule the rest of that day, just trying to hustle ahead and cut corners. The first thing we did on the trip was, and we did, a lot of this was repeat for me. So it didn't have the same impact the second time as the first time. Sometimes I saw with more clarity, and other times, oh yeah, I remember that, okay? So it just depended. But we watched the PBS documentary about the Montgomery bus boycott called Eyes, where's the name of it? Eyes of,
on the prize.
Yeah, Eyes of the Prize. And it really gave you all of the information moving forward that you needed to know about the Selma to Montgomery march that we saw, we heard about, saw the sights later in the trip. But it also showed you some of the figures in the civil rights movement that maybe you hadn't heard of. And everything that went into, and the courage that it took of the people of Montgomery to go through that and to stay strong and to ask God to help them through the whole process. Our first stop was in Birmingham. In Birmingham, the bus led us out at the Kelly Ingram Park, which is sort of the centerpiece of all of the civil rights things. I'm sorry, I keep forgetting. I get too busy talking. So you're good right there. The center of the civil rights movement in Birmingham, and the sites that were important in Birmingham, including the Civil Rights Museum, which is an all-day thing. And I've done that before, so if you ever make a trek to Birmingham and want to see some of these things, don't leave that out. But we didn't have time for it, obviously. So our one and only stop in Birmingham was at the 16th Street Baptist Church. The site of the bombing in 1963, here's the church. Isn't that a beautiful day? Gosh, we had a gorgeous day, and I love clouds when I take pictures. So we stopped at the church, and we went to the commemorative plaque for the 4 young girls that were killed in the bombing in 1963. They were walking up the staircase on their way between Sunday school and church, and the bomb went off in the staircase. And so this was the first site. This was something, some of it happened the last trip, but not all of it, where we heard speeches, famous speeches, that were given by civil rights people, 3 of them, one of them not so much, okay. Civil rights leaders that were significant and that started people thinking. And this one was given by Martin Luther King. Go ahead and forward. So we're at this site, there's Derrick Jackson, and move it one more forward. And look who's there in the picture. But Reverend Johnson did the speech by Martin Luther King entitled, it was a eulogy for the 4 slain girls, and he did a wonderful job on that. And these speeches just really put us at the heart of what went on and made us feel like, in some respects, that we were part of it. To hear him speak about these poor innocent children that were caught up in this movement and caught up unsuspecting, of what happened in numerous places. So that was our first stop, and the last trip we stopped and we had time to sit and eat a takeout lunch in the park and enjoy the park. And this time we got to hustle back on the bus because we're behind schedule and we have all these things to do. So we jumped on the bus on our way to Montgomery. And so Montgomery was our second stop and took up the rest of that day. When we got to Montgomery, go ahead, next. Our first stop was at the slave market. And Montgomery had the largest slave market in this part of the country. Okay, there might have been a bigger one in New Orleans, but that was about it. And a lot of the remnants of that, the whole building down along, there's the Alabama River that runs through Montgomery, and so the boats would come in with the slaves, and they'd have the slave market there, and there were a whole bunch of businesses, beautiful buildings in the area, and so there's a lot of commemoration of that part of Montgomery in recognition of what happened during that time. The next, as we look up here, the next one, go back, yeah. Okay, on the right-hand side, is the monument to Jefferson Davis. And it was built in the 1880s to commemorate his presidency of the Confederacy. And David Fleer, the professor, gave us a lot of background information going into this, things that we probably didn't know. Before we went to the steps of the Capitol building, go ahead, next one, okay. And we went up, you can go one more, okay. On the left-hand side, we're on the steps of the Capitol building, and our second speech took place. And this speech was given by Dr. Ted Hill. So y'all were really involved in it. And it was a speech by Jefferson Davis that was given at his inauguration as president of the Confederacy. And the language was so important. I don't know how to explain this. It sort of breaks my heart as a person who in my life has tried to be equal, tried to treat everyone equally. Because the language of the day was white supremacy, God-given supremacy, African Americans, animals. That's basically was the language of the speech. And so, you know, the whole thought process of that day and time I can't understand. And I hope most of you can understand. You know, this is a different time in a different place. And that's what a lot of this trip was about. If I run out of time, I'm going to go ahead and say this now, that the African Americans on this trip, both times, were so forgiving, reconciling, okay? They don't look at us as the people who caused their lives to be the way they were then. And they've gotten past that. And they didn't look at us on the trip as anybody different from them. And I would hope that we would see the same. And like anything, you got to know people to know who they are. And how do you know them? You make opportunities to be friends with them and to look for ways to work together on things. And so your plan to work with Keith Stewart is phenomenal. And I hope that y'all come up with some great things that allow the people of God of this church to work with the people of God of that church and make some positive things happen, whatever they happen to be. So that's the whole bottom line of a lot of these experiences, was having us talk about difficult subjects and hear difficult things. And as I get a little further down, I don't want to miss out, and I'll try to keep up with the time. But so Dr. Hill gave the speech using the words of Jefferson Davis, followed immediately on the right-hand side by a speech given by Martin Luther King called "Our God Keeps Marching On," that was given at the end of the Selma to Montgomery March in 1965. And this was given by Everton Campbell, who is a member at Church of God of Prophecy. Wow, what a phenomenal job he did. I felt like if I closed my eyes that Martin Luther King was standing right there. He did a great job with that. But the significance is that Jefferson Davis's speech occurred on the steps of the Capitol. And Martin Luther King was not allowed to set his feet on the steps of the Capitol. He had to give the speech from Dexter Avenue on a platform down below. So go ahead and move it a step forward. That's just a commemorative plaque. Go ahead. And then on the right, the left-hand side, we see the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. which was Martin Luther King's first church. And the last trip, the first trip that I took, we were able to tour the church and go to the museum, very nice museum there in the basement, and hear from one of the ministers at the church at the time, but this time it was still closed down to the public for COVID. And so we switched gears and had some other opportunities later on. Martin Luther King's speech is the famous one, if you've heard any of his, where the audience answered hundreds of times during the speech, "How long?" "Too long." "How long?" "Too long." And the whole point here is that many people wanted to see this whole movement take force and happen overnight. But as we know, it hasn't been overnight. And we're probably not there yet, where we need to be. But it's sort of an indication of the nonviolent way that Martin Luther King and his movement wanted things to happen. It was the most effective, and it did show many people around the world how we can stay in a peaceful way and make change at the same time. Okay, so looking down the street, we have Dexter Avenue, which is the big historic, it's very striking on both ends, Dexter Avenue in Montgomery, where you see the Capitol from the other end in the far distance, and then you see the statue with the fountain that you saw just a minute ago on the other end, and all these historic places on either side of the street, and we'll come back to one in just a second. Go ahead. And also on that street, here's the Rosa Parks statue and memorial, and we know what an important part she was of the civil rights movement, helping, being someone who was willing to step out and take a chance and get herself in good trouble to start the boycott, the Montgomery bus boycott. The afternoon was very emotional for me and for a lot of people, so move on ahead. There is there's Reverend Johnson again on the steps. There's a new museum in Montgomery that you can't pass up, and I'll mention this. They have a inside and an outside venue. So we went to two different venues. In the inside one, we couldn't take any pictures, so this is my one and only picture. But in the inside of the museum, there's a project going nationwide called the Equal Justice Initiative, and it's just trying to bring attention to some of the things that happened during that era, and with very positive results. We're talking a little bit about that on the Wednesday, the monthly meeting, and there are scholarships being given out nationwide to high school students for writing essays on justice and related topics. So they've got some positive things going. But this museum, inside and out, has three different parts, and I would have had some pictures that would have been a little, not risque, but a little disturbing if I had been able to take pictures inside, because it looks at the African American history of slavery, of lynchings, of unequal incarceration, and it looks at those over history of events that happened. And one of the things they have they have a lot of recognition of lynchings in the interior museum, but the outside one has some beautiful pieces of artwork that commemorate the more than 6,500 persons documented as lynched during that time period across the country. And the outside museum, it had artwork for each state and each county of lynchings. And the one for Sumner County, we knew this going in because we already had this information, but there were 5 known lynchings in Sumner County and the names of the people. And you see the piece of artwork on the right. There's one like that for every county in every state that had lynchings, okay, in this outdoor museum. So it takes up a whole lot of space. And then there is a waterfall. Have we passed that one yet? It might be on that left. I guess we did. Okay. Also, there are a lot of pieces of artwork depicting slavery and depicting slave ships. Go ahead and move forward. And then commemorating different people in the civil rights movement. So it's a beautiful outdoor setting for walking through and seeing a lot of that history. From there, we went to we had a very relaxing time because we needed it after that afternoon of seeing all of this. And we went to a buffet of home cooking and had just a wonderful time of conversation and fellowship. I know at my table we were talking about serious things, but we were also getting to know each other over the food. And that was a great experience to sort of break up the day. That evening, we visited, go ahead. Oh, that's the waterfall that I was talking about. And that waterfall commemorates all of the people that we don't know about that lost their lives in the civil rights movement. So keep going. That's dinner. And that's another table conversation. Okay, you can stop here. After dinner, we went to the Civil Rights Memorial Center, which is a national memorial. First, there's a Martin Luther King inspired waterfall with the biblical statement that is attributed to King, a little different word, until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. Then there's another piece of artwork. Okay, you can leave it here for a second. You can see on the right-hand side a lot of writing. This particular piece is just phenomenal. It's a beautiful piece of artwork. And it's, the water is flowing over all the significant events of the civil rights movement, from the lynching of Emmett Till in 1954. I would have said that was a great year, but that was the year I was born. So, up to the assassination of Martin Luther King in 1968. And immediately we noticed that there was a gap. And the gap is there by the artist in significance that we're not done yet, you know? There's still history in this movement, history in the future, just to show that it's not finished yet. And the artist is a woman named Maya Lin, who has several significant pieces of artwork at memorial national sites in Washington, D.C., and I can't name them specifically, but she's a well-known artist. After that, we stayed at that same site, and we found our little spot, and we had a devotional as the sun was going down. It was beautiful. You can move forward. And we're starting with that picture. We're starting the devotional, and this was what the site looked like after the sun went down. It was just phenomenal. You can leave it there for a second. So we stayed at that site, and we had a very emotional devotional time where people. This was an experience where people could say whatever they wanted to. They felt comfortable talking about the effects of the trip so far on them, and what was significant to them anything they wanted to say. We finished up with singing of Amazing Grace. I don't know how many times we sang it through, but probably about 20 verses. It doesn't have that many, but we made them up. And James, you saying something about that? But anyway, yeah, we just kept singing it and singing it. And if you knew the background history of Amazing Grace, there was some concern by the white people in the group that this singing of this might be misunderstood. But there was no issue. It's a beautiful song that brings out wonderful emotions and worship. And so we just kept singing it. So then we had time for rest. That was the end of day one. And we stayed at the downtown Hampton Inn, and I was on the 10th floor, and as soon as I got in my room, I opened the window, and there I had an overview of the Alabama River and all of the slave monuments and the slave market looking out my window. So next day, we had an early start, May 7th. We went to Tuskegee. And at Tuskegee, this is probably the highlight of the trip for me, and it was the first time as well. But in Tuskegee, we went to the Human and Civil Rights Multicultural Center. And there we had a private presentation from 91-year-old Fred Gray, attorney Fred Gray. Does that ring a bell for anybody? He just received an amazing award. He was named one of the Medal of Freedom recipients in Washington, D.C. just about a week ago. He spoke to us in a small setting. He told us how important having our group, he applauded our group for coming together like this and having the trip. He said that change takes people willing to take a step forward and step out and take chances, and just gave us a wonderful synopsis and briefly of the civil rights movement. I brought his 2 books and forgot to bring them up here, but I had bought one of them on the last trip and had read it, and so I knew all of his background and history. And then the second book was about the lawsuit against the U.S. Department of Health for the syphilis study of the African American men who were given doses of a medicine that wasn't so good for them, had a lot of health issues related to it. And so what Fred Gray is known for, he was Martin Luther King's lawyer during the civil rights movement. He was Rosa Parks' lawyer, and he lost that case, by the way, okay? And he has been a civil rights lawyer his entire life, and he is still practicing law in Tuskegee, Alabama. Go ahead and move forward. So this is just the center. Go ahead. Okay. And there he is talking on the left, and he signed autographs of his books. Multiple people listening intently. Those are the people on the right that are etched in the floor that were part of the syphilis study that won some financial help many years later as part of their participation in that. So the other thing I want to say about Fred Gray is that he went through a lot to become a lawyer in 1954. He went through a lot. The state of Alabama was not allowing African Americans into their only law school at the University of Alabama. They would not allow Alabama State, the traditional African American school, to to start a law school. And so he went up to Cleveland, Ohio, and went to Cleveland State to become a lawyer. And on his trips up and down, where did he stop? He stopped in Gallatin, Tennessee. You know, it was really difficult for African Americans during that time to find a motel that would allow them to stay in. But he had a friend from school living here in Gallatin. And that name, James, do you know who that was? No. Someone from Gallatin that he had been lifelong friends with. And that was because he took a liking to coming here and visiting his friends, so anytime he was going back and forth, he stopped in Gallatin. So he remembered that. He talked to us about Gallatin and his experiences here. So, I got to continue with that day because we're running out of time. From there, we went to, oh, by the way, there's a picture, go forward. On the left-hand side, that's Alana Hibbler, who's helping the director of the museum run the cash register because there's so many people buying things, okay? So locally, Alana Hibbler. On the right side of that picture is Fred Gray's daughter, who is the manager of the museum. So she's taken that on. So we then went to move ahead to the Tuskegee Air Museum. Have you heard of the Tuskegee Airmen? We did this the last time I went too. So Tuskegee was basically the same trip as I took the last time, except that the last trip we went to Tuskegee University. We actually spent the night there, but they were having graduation going on that day, so we could not get to the campus. So the Tuskegee Air Museum it is still a working airport, but it commemorates these African Americans who were recruited into the Air Force during World War II to support the other troops during World War II, and they had one after another of amazing success stories, but they were not treated the same at all as the other airmen. They had the same duties and responsibilities, but not the same treatment. And so we went through, toured again. It is another national park, national memorial. We had one of the park rangers come on our bus and gave us a little memento for the trip and talked to us for a few minutes. Keep going. They also, even though this was their center, they had separate facilities. The waiting area for the pilots, the restrooms, everything was separate for them. But this was their facility. Keep going. And so that they have vintage planes, again. Several pictures showing there were women involved as part of it. Yeah, that's the only picture I have of myself on the slideshow, and it's the only one I had. So it's a selfie. Keep going. But probably the highlight of that for me was we were able to write thank you notes, birthday cards to a former airman, Sergeant Victor, who was going to be there in about 10 days celebrating his 100th birthday. And he was coming back there for his birthday celebration. And I recently saw in the news that another 100-year-old Tuskegee Airman had passed away, so there are very few of them left at this time. But certainly their posterity has passed on. Okay, so next. All right, then we're off. Our last destination is Selma. And the first place we went, what does it say on that tower? Yeah, sort of similar to Gallatin. It's a nice place to live. Anyway, so in Selma, we had some new experiences. The first places we went, the first one was, go ahead, Brown's Chapel AME Church. And this was the site of Malcolm X's speech called House Negro, Field Negro. It's pretty disturbing, but it made a lot of sense, to the civil rights movement. And this speech was given 1 week before he was assassinated. And I would go into a little more history. He sort of has a bad name, but shortly before he died, my understanding is he converted back to Christianity. And that all the evidence is that the people who assassinated him did not like him leaving the black Muslims and taking a more peaceful stance on things. So the and the speech was given by one of the members of First Baptist Winchester, and I missed her name. Do you know? Is it Lindsay something, I think, okay? But she did a wonderful job playing the role of Malcolm X. So, keep going. Okay, next stop was at the Tabernacle Missionary Baptist Church, and we had, go ahead, I want to mention something about this. One of the significant things related to civil rights in this church was that it was a Gothic style architecture, and the left side is on Main Street, and the right side is on a side street. And the local government would not allow the African American church to enter from Main Street. They had to enter from the side street. So they decided in their architecture they would make them look just alike. So they would recognize they were entering from the front of the building for them. It's a beautiful building, but they are in the process of building a new one. This building was, I think, 1884. It was built in 1884, and they have a new building that's going to be going up. They were in the process of raising money for. Keep going. And while we got inside, we had a docent that spoke to us about the history of this church and the civil rights movement, the history of Selma University and the civil rights movement, and she was a retired school superintendent from the area. I didn't catch whether she was that county or city or what, but she was a retired school superintendent. And then, keep going, that's the church, that's what we looked up to. We were there, that's the docent on the left, and they have a small museum that we walk through and look at things. Okay, so the last stop for us was the Edmond Pettis Bridge. And who's seen the movie Selma in here? Yeah, a few. But we had the experience on the first trip as well of joining elbows, hands, whatever, with someone of the other race and walking across the bridge. And I would say this time that was a much more scary experience. And I don't know why, but the traffic was going like 90 miles an hour by us the whole time. But it's also a very moving experience of walking across that bridge where we've seen the horror of what happened back in 1965. What? It was 1965, yeah. The first time across. John Lewis was part of that group, along with a lot of other well-known civil rights leaders, starting the beginning place for the march to Montgomery. The Selma to Montgomery march was going across that bridge. And they met a bunch of state officers on horseback with weapons, etc., at the end of the downslope on the other side. And several people killed, and a lot of people gravely injured, including John Lewis. And so they had to stop. They couldn't take off that trip. Well, on that trip, Martin Luther King was not available, so he wasn't there. But by the time they reorganized, he was there. And the one thing you can say about this particular experience the first time was that there was a lot of national media exposure, and there were now TVs in people's homes. And so they were able to see right in their living rooms what happened and how horrible the inhumanity was in this day, okay? And they were able to see that. And I think that had a huge impact on the rest of the civil rights movement. So on the other side of the bridge is another historic monument, a national monument. Keep going, okay? And so that was our finishing off point with closing prayers, and there were some monuments there, and so this is the group from the First Presbyterian Church around the monument to John Lewis to finish that up. And then we hopped on the bus, and we had approximately a 5-hour trip back that got us in at 11:30 p.m. on Saturday. So we left at 6:30 a.m. on Friday, back 11:30 p.m. on Saturday. Packed as much as we could possibly pack in, eating on the run every time, except for that one meal in Montgomery. And we watched, on the way home, we watched the movie Selma. But that was like the 5th time I had seen that movie, but it's still moving every time you watch it. So when you are in that kind of mood, it's one of those depressing movies. But when you're in that kind of mood, please take the time to, pull that one up. It's an easy one to access. That'll tell you a lot of information about the whole civil rights movement. I did this PowerPoint as a follow-up at First Presbyterian Church at a Wednesday night service. We invited all the people that went on the trip to come that Wednesday night. A lot of them obviously are involved with other churches, so they couldn't come, but we did have a wonderful experience that night that's different from me just speaking to you today, in that we had sort of an open mic, and people could say what they wanted to say, and so we had a good experience with that. And I didn't do as much talking. I just sort of did the facilitating of the event. So it's not too late, is the point I want to make in closing. It's not too late to make a difference. In Fred Gray's words, for change to happen, you have to be willing to act, and you have to make a plan, and you have to be intentional, and you have to the best of your ability, carry out that plan. And so each of us in this room can do little things to improve the relations with all people, not just whites to African Americans, but to all people around this world. I've had the wonderful advantage in my life of doing a lot of world traveling, some to third world countries, some mission trips, some not, some educational trips. But I've always had the opportunity to get to know people on a personal level for who they are and not the color of their skin. And so that's what I would close with today is, hey, this opportunity will happen again. There's talk about doing a youth trip, and I think that would be the best thing ever to take youth from all the different churches in Gallatin on the same trip and expose them to the history. But you don't have to go on this trip to make a difference. So thank you so much for having me, and hope you got something out of it. There's a lot, and I feel like I sped through with just pictures that will show you. But again, it was my second opportunity. I didn't intend to go the second time, but it didn't fill up, and I didn't want the bus to be empty, so I went again. And I was very happy that I went because there were new experiences and new emotions on the second time through. So, thank you.